I'd like to call to order the January 8th, 2019 meeting of the Preservation Commission. We have a quorum of 6 exactly. Has everyone who intends to speak signed in? Okay, thank you. Our first matter is, we'll first turn to old business. The first matter, 834 Madison Street, was withdrawn by the applicant. So I assume there's nothing we need to do to move that on. The second matter is 1222 Dryden Place. The applicant has asked that the application be continued until our next meeting on February 12th. Would somebody like to move for it to be continued?
I move that we take the application 1222 Dryden and continue it to the next meeting of February. Need the exact date?
Diane, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Okay. The third matter up today is 1210 Michigan Avenue, which was continued from, I guess it was actually presented, I think 2 meetings ago. And has been continued. Michelle Beck, applicant, do you want to present your?
Yes, please. And should I grab the clicker?
We don't have the clicker, so just let us know.
Okay.
Slide.
All right. And apologies for the high volume of materials for a 20 by 20 garage. I didn't know how else to tell the story. So recapping, I'm not sure if all the members were here when I came before.
Probably not.
Don't need to recap, or should I?
You should.
Okay, so we seek to build a garage, and it requires a variance because it is in a side yard, and one dimension is only 5 feet from the house rather than 10 feet required. We previously received permission to have the garage permitted at the very, very back of the garden. We've asked to move it forward, and our reasons were to be able to create a garden and to reduce the paved space and to not have to plow the entire city block if we need to get our cars in and out of there. When we met last time, and it is in a historic district, a historic building. So the discussion we had was that without, I noted that the neighborhood has no alley and that everyone's garage is near the street in this particular neighborhood. And the commission noted they needed a little bit of evidence of that and to be able to evaluate that. And then other questions that came up were the integrity of using the octagonal window that we had proposed, the use of Danley's as a contractor and whether it would be a high enough quality. And there was a question about whether the 3D elevations were accurate in representing the distance. So we provided more materials on all of those items. Go to the next page. So this is a neighborhood diagram, and I've highlighted the 4 houses that surround us. So we are the only house that's not highlighted. It's 1210 Michigan there. And in the dashed red zone is where we're proposing to put the garage. My note here is that everyone else's garage is actually closer to the street than the one we're proposing, and that all the houses have a garage close to the street. So if we can move forward, this is the first house. That yellow house in the background is my house. This is the neighbor most adjacent to the garage. We picture here their garage, which is adjacent to their house and very close to the pavement, as you can see.
Just a question, is that their backyard? Isn't that around the side of the house rather than in front?
They're on a corner.
Right.
So both sides of their house are on the street. So you could call that a backyard, but you can see they occupy that full corner.
Address is that again?
Pardon me?
Which address is?
225 Hamilton is that one.
So, it looks like the garage, okay.
There's no actual backyard for them, but they've told me also they moved it. It was moved forward before their time in the house. It had at one point been in the corner pocket and was moved closer to the street. I can't verify whether that's true or not, but that's just what they said. This, by the way, this Google Maps picture, their house is closer to the street than pictured here, so it's not perfectly accurate, but I thought it was useful for just giving the relative location of these houses. So it's there, they do have the full corner. It could have been on the other side near our driveway, but those are and it apparently was a little bit further back in their yard before. This is just a side view of their same house. Now we move to our next door neighbor on the other side. And again, mine is the yellow house there, and our garage would be located behind its porch. So here we have the house next to us, and the garage is integral to the building. It's right there. And then the next one is around the corner at 222 Burnham Place. Theirs is set a little bit further back. And next to them is also the garage of the folks that face out on Forest. And then finally, another house that faces out on Forest. This is their backyard. So I don't know if this one counts or doesn't, but it's also just right there. They're all right in a U shape around our house. Everyone has a garage, and it's closer to the street than the one we're trying to do. So I thought you can consume that as you will, but that was, I thought, it helped you see that without an alley, we all end up with our garages pretty close to the street. We are the only house without a garage. So moving on from the question of the situation of the garages, the other things we wanted to do were address some of the stylistic questions. The thing we didn't do is ditch Danley's, which might have been more popular. We are using their best materials. We're using wood siding. It should look like the house. And I guess the concern I had was for me to go ahead and invest in another builder, put a deposit down, where I still might get to a no at the end of it. It was just a little bit too much to spend to not know what the outcome's going to be. If there was a world that was more certain that if I only had another builder, then we'd be in like Flynn, I wasn't sure that was the case. I couldn't see putting down a deposit with yet another company. So we went for a couple more upgrades or improvements to bring the garage in keeping with the house. One was to get rid of the octagonal window, agreed the point that it didn't have really any bearing on the rest of the house. It sort of matched what our neighbors were doing, but it didn't really match our house. So we went with a double hung, and I've asked for proportions that are similar to the proportions of the windows in the front. And we were replacing the metal garage door with a wood door. And our plan would be to make it identical in stain and color to the front door of our house so that it has a little bit better fit. So if we can go to the next slide. So we updated the 3D rendering and the plans with those updated features. We also, somebody mentioned, you better make sure you want to have a garage there. It might be something of a unpleasant eyesore. So we went ahead and staked it out. Put stakes in the ground, checked it out, put our cars there. I was quite comfortable at the end of that it doesn't mess with any trees, it doesn't mess with the neighbors' views. It's set pretty far back, and our home's views are away from the garage. So I was left thinking it's actually a pretty good location for the garage, in my opinion. If we go to the next page, this reminds us of the site plan. So the front is Michigan Avenue there. And if we go to that's the existing plan, and we're proposing to put the garage in that location behind the porch.
So can you just remind us on that, what is the side yard requirement? And then it has to be 10 feet from the existing house?
That's right.
And then what about the side yard requirement?
So the side yard requirement, we need a variance to be able to build in a side yard. And then 5 feet from the border of the property is where the garage can begin. So if you see the bottom of the plot, that's 5 feet from the fence. And the controversial dimension is the one that is marked in the upper left-hand corner of the garage to that little structure of the house. That's a 5-foot dimension. You can see that it's more than 10 to the rest of the house, and it's more than 5. It's more like 7 or 8 to the porch.
And then what's the front yard setback? You're fine with that? Front yard setback, but you're...
In terms of how far forward it is allowed to be, if I recall, I'm not sure I know it as a dimension.
Okay.
I knew that it had to,
Okay. But basically, you were fine with that because you already went through zoning. It was just...
Those were the two elements that required a variance. The other thing that we've submitted for also is a fence to bracket the garage on either side, which keeps the dog in. But so that also though would require, that would be moving an existing fence from the back there up to be flush with the front of the garage. If we go to the next page, these are the updated plans, and the only elements of them that are updated are that window and that garage door. And you see that in the lower left-hand corner elevation, the street-facing elevation. And I believe the next page is the rendering. So again, the colors are a little bit off here in terms of the match of the door and the door. We would make that happen. This does include the concept of the fence as well and shows the updated features. I'm not sure if there's anything else that's new in the package. Oh, this was where, now we go into a long sequence where we stake out the garage. I'm not sure that's that helpful to you. It was helpful to us, however. I highlighted it in red because it was a little hard to see the yellow tapes in the photographs that we took. But that would be the location of it. And we just show it's kind of adjacent to where the two neighbors' garages are. I don't think that's neither here nor there, but we staked it out 5 feet in this upper left-hand picture from the fence. Not the best photograph in the upper right to show you how close it is to the fence. The lower photograph shows you the 5-foot distance that requires the variance to the part of the house that sticks out. So then this all recaps the original package that we submitted. I don't know that we need to go through that in the interests of time, but I'm happy to go through any elements of it that are of interest.
Okay. And you had approval to build the garage all the way back behind the house?
Yes, and so when we discussed it last time, the issue was basically it creates an almost entirely paved backyard. So we by doing this, we can create an actual yard behind it and not have to shovel that length of distance, half the length, but not the full length. And that was why we were seeking this variance. And our plan in the event that we don't receive the variance would be to erect a non-permanent structure like a carport so that we don't have to go all the way to the back of the garage, and so we can develop a garden.
Are there questions for the applicant before we turn to discussion? Elliot?
I do have a question. So, and this is really not our purview, but I just want to bring it up that, if this goes through, I just was wondering if the city was going to require you to show any civil work or anything, because I don't know your whole, the grading is going to change in terms of pushing the building up and your impervious surface and all of that. So I assume that just highlighting
That's a piece to look into. What's there right now is paved surface. So that right now it goes all the way back to
So it's just
the line where
right.
the fence is.
I would just say that because you are putting a structure there.
Okay.
It's all the way in the back. So I would just make sure that with Ingrid at the city and civil that you're okay.
So it's about drainage, because it is up on a hill relative to where the driveway begins, which probably will help. But thank you for that information.
Elliot?
Yeah. Couple things. First of all, I think it was inappropriate to even bring up the issue of Danley last time. I don't think we should be commenting on one contractor versus another. And so I don't even think that should have been an issue, and you shouldn't have been either shell-shocked or gun-shy or whatever other term we can use. I think you're all right with where you put it in terms of the tape, but I don't think tape replicates the three-dimensional volume of the garage. So it's not the same. It's like if I draw it on the ground, it's not the same. I do have a question about why your windows on the west side are so different. I know what you're doing in terms of the window over the door. Carlos, if you go to that. If you ever get to it. Yeah, it's this elevation. I mean, once you've committed yourself to a proportion that's similar to what you have at the front of the house, why aren't all the other windows?
I think it was oversight in the sense that the focus was on the front. There's no limitations being placed on us in terms of the dimensions of the windows that we can use. So we probably should have and could have sought to have them all be the same dimension.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost, and it's curious because I have a feeling looking at your next picture, Carlos, that window above the garage probably could have been slightly different proportion. I don't know if it's really replicating one of those two. And then you're suddenly holding that vertical dimension and making it fatter as we go back. And I mean, I think it looks like the vertical has been held and they've suddenly gotten squished out.
In my
think,
request,
once you're committed to this, it's odd to be turning the corner and suddenly saying, well, it's a Western storefront. We do what we want on the street side, and who cares what's behind it? I think you should at least be consistent. I had one other question, which I'm curious about. Could you have, once you're asking for a variance, and maybe you were avoiding it, not try being closer to the fence and then being further away from the house, which would have also resolved some of the issues of how close you were to the house? Meaning, instead of living with the 5 feet, going to 3 feet, I'm not saying 0. And that would have given you 8 feet or more, which I think would have made it much clearer in terms of the relationship to the house.
I asked a question about that also, I think in our application, but I'm not sure how to, obviously not that experienced at doing these, so I don't know how to get these resolved. One of the thoughts I had is moving it forward a little, because then what it's closer to then is the porch, which is a different kind of structure than the house. Just a little bit moving up would have removed that problem as well. But yeah, we didn't look into moving over in the other direction. It was, we weren't sure which was the worst problem to clear. So it certainly would be possible. Our neighbors are not, are friendly toward the project. So
Might have been unhappy, but on the other hand, it's the back of their house as far as I can tell, because they're facing Hamilton.
it's true. It is the back of their house, and they know that we're going to be repairing the fence as part of this. The fence has completely fallen down. They were the original owners of the fence. It's a good deal from their point of view as well. So we're being neighborly on the fence, and so I don't think that would be a grave concern to them, but I would need to check with them.
I'd like to have a discussion of this, but are there other questions for the applicant before we move to a discussion of the commission? All right. I guess I went and walked around the neighborhood because I was puzzled by the placement. I mean, most of the houses on Michigan have alley access, and so they don't. I mean, there are no other houses with equivalent side yard garages. The house immediately to the north has a new house with an attached garage. The other garages that were not on the alley and not attached in the neighborhood that I noticed, I think you showed all of them, and none of them are really side yard garages. They're just tucked in behind, basically tucked in on the side street behind the houses. And I would just say that people who don't have an alley, there's not exact commonality, but they're searching for kind of the least obtrusive place to squeeze in the garage that's not, doesn't affect the visual appearance of the house. As I walked by and as I looked at the pictures, it seemed to me placing the garage right next to the front of the house, excluding the porch, is going to be a very visually prominent element, which is kind of what the restriction on side yard garages, I think, is meant to prevent. And I certainly would be more comfortable if the garage were at the, basically the back of it, at the back of the house, and so you would still have a backyard. I think it would be much less visually obtrusive that way, and therefore, more fitting with the rest of the neighborhood, which doesn't have kind of really visible side yard garages, and where people, again, have had to fit them in somewhere in the back of the house. They've really tucked them in as unobtrusively as they could. So I don't know if other people, if anybody else had the same feeling, but that was my perception.
I think I just think I don't have a problem actually moving it up. I just, where it is, I just think you have to think about, like you drew that little fence, there's a little fence in, and there's going to be a direct relationship that you're going to see between the existing house and then that new piece. And then, so having having that little fence, which is behind the other thing, which is white, I mean, that vocabulary of that fence, which is maybe it's just not even there. I mean, because it's not set in line with anything. I don't have a problem with bringing the garage up like that. But I would say that fence, you might just wait, see what where it's placed, and because it's actually behind the other porch. And so anyway, that was my comment on those fences.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
I think I actually would agree with you, Mark, that I went around the area and I went around some other areas and I looked at the garage that was brought up at the last meeting that Mary mentioned that was pushed forward, and I particularly think having the garage in the side yard it's just not something that I would prefer, and I think that they're better placed in the rear of the lot. But that's, just my opinion.
Okay, any other comments? Would anybody like to make a motion?
What? Mark, I can make one if
Yeah,
you
why don't you
wish.
do it, Diane?
Okay.
Now that you're a
It's-
layperson.
Since it's been a while, we'll see if I know how to do it. I move that we issue a certificate of appropriateness for the construction of the detached garage at 1210 Michigan Avenue. The garage is proposed to be located within the south interior side yard, and the applicable standards are construction 1 through 5, 7 through 13, and 16, and also that we recommend approval of the minor zoning variation for 6462, detached accessory structures required to be located 10 feet from the principal structure, and 6.3, detached accessory structure not permitted within interior side yards between the side property line and principal building. Oh, sure. With that motion, the recommendation that the windows be proportional with the window on the street-facing facade.
For a second?
Second.
Ken? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against? It's approved. 2 against.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. The next matter of old business was 1239 Asbury Avenue. The applicant has requested that it be continued until our February 12th meeting. Could I hear a motion to approve that? Okay.
I move we continue the application for 1239 Asbury Avenue to the meeting of February 12th.
Second? Second, Julie. All in favor?
Aye.
Any against? No? Okay. Our final matter of business is a new business for the Arab District expansion. And are you speaking to this, or?
Yes. Before you bring on the applicant, I just want to give some context to why they're here today. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Kimberly Richardson, Deputy City Manager, and I have been working with the committee, the ERUV committee, to get to this point over the last 3 years. And so I wanted to give you a little context of why they're here today. As the committee went to City Council in November to discuss the ERUV project expansion, the City Council referred them to DAPR. After review at DAPR, DAPR then referred the committee to come in front of you to discuss the lakefront property area that's looking to be a part of the expansion plan. And so I just wanted to give a little context because I know that this is kind of out of nowhere for some. And so with that discussion that has been occurring over the course of the last couple of months, we felt that it was important to come to preservation to get the feedback there before going back to City Council with any changes or modifications to the plan if appropriate. So I will not speak on the actual application. I will leave that to Mr. Matanke, but I just wanted to give you that background for reference.
The DAPR, I think there were committee minutes were in the package.
Correct.
And it looked like there wasn't a decision reached.
That is correct.
Okay.
It seems like, and it really, the decision really needs to go back to City Council. But my understanding from City Council, they wanted to get the input from staff and from preservation because of the areas for where the poles are being located. And so before any further action is taken, we wanted to make sure we've kind of done some of that background.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
And I'm here to answer any questions in regards to staff input or concerns that were being discussed in that region, in that area.
Thank you. Speaking for the applicant, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I'm Robert W. Matanke, and I was asked to start working on this project a number of years ago, and I appreciate your spending the time tonight to look at some of the detail. An ERUV has existed in the south portion of Evanston since 1992. What's really wonderful about it is that we achieved our goals. Aesthetically, it blends in to the point that when I had a meeting a few years ago with city staff and mentioned how we had some poles and cable, aerial cable, a number of the people who hadn't been there in 1992 didn't even realize it was there. So that was something I took as a compliment because that was our goal, to make it virtually invisible, where it doesn't stick out. The ERUV is a benefit to the whole community, creates community. It extends the boundaries of one's home to the larger community so that on the Sabbath, instead of having people being stuck in their homes, for instance, with an infant or a disabled person who wouldn't otherwise be able to go outside on their own, people are able to enjoy and integrate into the community. It serves a number of benefits, as were mentioned in some of the background materials. And our goal is to bring this project to fruition, to better integrate neighbors within Evanston, to create better community, to facilitate accessibility for those who are unable to otherwise get out and go places, whether they're disabled or infants, for instance. It provides opportunities for visiting the sick at the hospitals that are here. Oftentimes on the Sabbath, a relative might have to walk to a hospital on a hot summer day. It means not carrying a bottle of water, something people take for granted. It's walking for several miles on a really hot summer day without a bottle of water is not only not pleasant, sometimes it's dangerous. Things of that nature. And it's something that we've found in other communities and in cities across the country, across North America and other locations, that it creates stability and improves the value of community. So that's the premise of why we're here. It's something good. It exists in hundreds of communities, not just in Israel, obviously. And if anybody here has ever gone to Tel Aviv, it's the Eruv Wire in Tel Aviv runs right along the beach over there, and doesn't detract from a beach that attracts people from all over the world, tourists and visitors who go there for enjoying it. There's an Eruv, for instance, in Miami Beach that runs along the beach. There's an Eruv in the U.S. Capitol. When Joe Lieberman was a member of the United States Senate, he was able to use that Eruv, and the Vice President Al Gore followed him in his car as he was walking back to his apartment. These are just anecdotal. It also exists in a lot of college towns. And I'm not saying that Evanston is a college town, nor would I say that New York is, but for instance, New York University has an Eruv in that portion around Washington Square. Harvard has an Eruv in Cambridge Yard. UCLA has an Eruv. There's an Eruv for Penn. These are all great cities that have an Eruv and that help to draw a broader population to their universities. An Eruv was just recently built last year for the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Again, this is all just background information. The fact is that Evanston has had an Eruv since 1992. We want to expand it so that it provides more service and more benefit to more people. What our goal was again the same as what we had done back in 1992, was to install, and as it relates to the lakefront, 5 poles that will be similar to poles that are already existing there, and a similar type of aerial cable as already exists across Asbury and Ridge and Custer. Barely visible. It's 3/8 of an inch or slightly smaller. And that creates a symbolic doorway. It connects the riprap, for instance, which creates a wall to the point where then you have a nice sandy beach and you have to figure out how to connect the walls and do so with doorways. So the poles become symbolic doorposts. The cable which we're proposing to run on top is the header. And it's tried and true. It's been done before, and we hope that you'll be able to support us. Do you want me to walk you through the specific locations? Okay. Let's start up at the north, just south of Northwest
Excuse me. We just want to make sure that you refer to the circle area because that's the Lakeshore Historic District. That's the purview of the commission.
Yes,
Just for your information.
that's what I'll refer to.
Okay.
And if it's all right, then I'll start with the Clark Street Beach. At the Clark Street Beach, there's a series of poles, and there's a black line that's showing there, which is representative of the path of the aerial wire. That line, if it was to scale, would be invisible, so it was exaggerated just to show the path. And then at the end of that line, and you can see where the arrow in purple points, we propose installing a 20-foot black pole, which is similar to the light poles that are there, so that the cable could run to that location. At that location, there's a gate that goes to Dog Beach, a gate, again, like a doorway, and then along Dog Beach, there's a 4-foot-high snow fence, which we would just propose to make sure is sturdy. Our original design had included putting in galvanized steel fence posts. There was some comment that we had when we visited with Dapper about that, and we withdrew that. We said we would use the same means of installation as the city already uses and just make sure that it's made sturdier. Next slide.
Could you just go back to exactly, I mean, we're just trying to improve exact physical features.
Yes.
So you're going to install one pole on this picture.
Right,
then
yep, right there.
Are you modifying the fence in any way, or you're simply going to reinforce certain?
Just reinforce. We're not changing the fence. It'll still be the same snow fence.
Okay, thank
But
you.
if it's falling down or if it's broken, we'll repair it and make sure it's sturdy.
Okay, thanks.
So sorry, to be clear, the bottom photo is kind of a rendering showing the added post, or that's a photo?
Yes.
Okay.
Photoshop. Now, there was some discussion at Dapper as to whether or not it might be beneficial to have, instead of just a light pole, have one that was actually electrified with additional light. Again, this is a project that is not being funded by the city of Evanston. It's being funded through private donations. I have no authority to agree to start putting in a whole series of new electric light poles, but we would certainly work with the city so that whatever we did wouldn't make it more expensive to do so. I was trying to get a cost figured just for the pole itself, not for electrification or for the light head. I have not yet gotten it, but I think it might be possible for us to be able to share in that cost, so that if instead of putting up just a plain pole, we had something that was exactly the same as what's already existing all along the lakefront in the walking path. That's just a depiction. It was originally the Photoshop of how we showed the galvanized steel pipe fence posts, and we already said that we would limit those so that they're just 4 feet above grade, the same as what exists there, and just use the same installation method to make sure that the fence is not broken and properly supported. So ignore the Photoshop of the galvanized pipe.
And that is the fencing material that's there?
Yes. Well, all the same fencing material along the lakefront is 4-foot-high snow fence. We will not change that. We'll use that same material.
That's confusing when I was reading this, because your text implies, reinforced, et cetera, 5-foot-high fence posts. Posts should be spaced 7.5 feet apart, as if you're intending to put in 5-foot posts spaced 7.5 feet apart, as opposed to leaving the 4-foot fence. Which is it?
As I mentioned, we're withdrawing the request to put in the galvanized pipe posts that would have extended 5 feet above the grade. We're going to be using the same material for the posts that the city of Evanston currently uses at the lakefront.
So basically that paragraph below, with the exception of the 332nd galvanized cables, well, even that doesn't apply.
It's
Actually, that entire
obsolete.
paragraph doesn't apply.
Right. This was submitted before the Dapper meeting. I'm sorry I didn't have it modified in the pictorial, but in the verbiage of the submission, we had agreed just to keep it the same standard as the city of Evanston current. Okay, so the next one then, we see that there's, again, similar line of where the posts would be. Now, at the boat launch, that's a motorboat launch, there are currently 2 light poles at the center of the boat launch and at the south end of the boat launch. They're about 30 feet high, and our goal over there is to install, again, a 30-foot-high similar pole or matching tube, because those are tubes over there, so that we can run the cable across from one side to the other. And otherwise, there's a gate just to the north side from Dog Beach. That gate is a sufficient door within the fence wall. Then those poles across the boat launch would constitute, again, 2 interconnected doorways. And then to the south, again, just reinforce some of the existing fence that's there. Till we get to a point all the way at the south end over there when it picks up to the poles. If you want to show the next slide. Down below, by the way, that was Photoshop of just what a 30-foot pole would look like, because you've got those other poles that are there. That's where we're reinforcing a little bit of fence at the gate that's there. And again, the next section also just reinforcing some existing fence. Next slide. Okay, now the Greenwood Street Beach, we're proposing to install 1 pole at the north end, right where the little hand is over it. And same thing, a 20-foot-high pole, and we're hoping that we can figure out how to budget it so that we can get one that's matching. And hopefully then the city will cooperate with us if they want to put a light head on it, and if they want to electrify it, then we'll work together. and then running the aerial cable between the new one along the existing ones to that point right over there. There is some existing black chain link fence that already runs almost all the way to that location, and we would just extend it somewhat. Again, we want to match the existing materials. We don't want to put a patch on it. We want to keep it aesthetically similar.
You're going to extend the fence itself, and not just the.
The length of that fence, the fence comes to a point right near where it curves, a little bit right around there, and we just want to extend it a little bit to the point of that pole. The fence is running all along. That's the Dempster Street sailboat launch area, and that fence is already all there, with the exception of the last few feet that we want to extend so that it connects up to the last pole at the end of the black line on the south, to the right-hand side there. Any questions on that? Okay, next slide then. This is Lee Street Beach. And at the top, by the way, that was the Photoshop that showed the existing fence and proposed extension of it. It would replace some of the snow fence with the matching chain link. The Lee Street Beach on the bottom of this picture over here, again, our proposal was to run the aerial cable on top of the existing light poles. That's the heavy black line. And at either end of the beach to install one 20-foot high pole matching so that the cable could terminate at those locations. We were asked to consider whether we would install wrought iron fence 4-foot high at this location, and I'm not sure whether or not they had intended this location at Lee Street or at Dempster Street. It was Lee Street? Okay. We'll consider it. I'm not sure that it makes as much sense as just running a small cable on top of the poles. But we'll leave it up to the people who might know the aesthetics better than I do. I think it would be easier to maintain just the cable itself and not have to worry about maintaining a fence. That's the north and south ends of the beach where we're proposing to put the poles. On the north picture, there you go. That's one over there. It's hard to see the one on the south, but it's a little to the left of that. I think somewhere around there. But hard, it's, again, they photoshopped it in trying to keep the same dimension of what it would actually be, and it's just hard to see. We were asked, interestingly, by Northwestern University to do a Photoshop of what it would look like from the new music building. It was such an expensive project, and where they cleared the property so they'd have this unobstructed view all the way down the lakefront. And the guys who were doing the Photoshop finally came back and said they couldn't do it. And they actually pointed out that there was a cable existing at one of the walk areas near the beach. And when they took the picture to show that area and the cable was close in proximity to where the cable was proposed, you couldn't see the cable. So it's just... Okay, next page. I was asked to show what a 4-foot high wrought iron fence section might look like. So that's it. It's hopefully inconsequential and that we'll receive your support. Are there any questions that I can answer?
Questions? No? Okay.
You want the public first?
Sure. Let's let the public speak.
I did.
Okay.
I am William McGrath at 943 Edgemere Court. right at the corner of Lee Street Beach and at the corner of the wrought iron fence. I guess I'm kind of struggling to understand exactly what we're fencing in or what we're fencing out. So maybe I don't understand the concern, but I'm also concerned about how do you get past the residential areas along the lakefront. You have south of Kedzie down to, I guess it's called Clark Street Beach down at the south end, and you have the area of Edgemere Court. And there's a picture there of Edgemere Court that I absolutely, maybe you could put it up. I absolutely could not understand it. And maybe you could explain to us exactly how the wire works in that area. Also, just I'll make a comment that these snow fences, at least the one along Lee Street Beach, are taken down and moved in the wintertime. And they become snow fences, and in the summertime they're used as a barrier for beach access. To control the beach access. And I don't know if that matters or if that's taken into account. And that may be why they suggested the wrought iron permanent fence along the Lee Street Beach area.
First of all, thank you, Mr. McGrath. The snow fence at Lee Street Beach and all the beaches, especially during the springtime when they have to regrade the beaches, in a number of areas that snow fence is removed for the grading machinery that has to come in. And we're not using that snow fence at the beaches. We're using it at places where we don't have the sand, and then that's where we transition to the cable on top of the light poles 20 feet in the air. So whatever machinery has to go through, or whatever people go through, for instance, to access the beach, are completely unimpeded by our proposal. With regards to Kedzie, interestingly, we had originally proposed 3 poles at that location, and during the process of our design and requesting permission, Hugh Darvish bought a house and got permission to put up a fence, which eliminated the need for putting up those 3 poles, so we withdrew them. Once he puts up his fence, and with I understand he's being held back right now from part of the fence, but the homes that are there, with the exception of 2 with whom we're speaking right now, are all close enough together, and a lot of them with side yard fences or gates, so that the houses themselves are the walls. The walls of the houses are the houses themselves. The wall for the neighborhood becomes the house. So
just help me understand. Are you trying to create access to the beach or access along the lakefront where people can walk up and down? I mean, I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, right. It's not specifically, the beach wouldn't be included in the ARUV boundary. It would be outside. That's why we have to create the doorway, the interconnected doorway at the front of the beach, because there's no wall otherwise. Because what we're trying to do is create the city to be like one big house, one big neighborhood of a house that's all interconnected doors and walls. The beach, unfortunately, doesn't qualify for that. That's why at those locations, we have the proposal for the cable on top of the poles, because that's the interconnected doorways. The city of Chicago in Lakeview has an ARUV, and I'm sure probably most of you have never noticed. But even across Lakeshore Drive, beautiful picturesque Lakeshore Drive, there's cable that runs across at Irving Park and at Diversey, which is part of the ARUV boundary there.
I mean, let me just point to, this is the part where I live, and I'm just trying to really understand what in the world is going on here. I mean, so if you could kind of help me with that.
The purple line over there is Lee Street.
We have a blow up somewhere. Maybe we just did it on our computer. I don't know, maybe. But anyhow.
But that's blown up a lot. The purple line that was Lee Street Beach is where we're proposing the aerial cable on top of the poles.
Right.
And then it ties into the fence at your house, sir. And that all ties in then to the homes that are there.
Well,
in other words, they're all interconnected.
I'm just saying, my fence runs east and west.
Right.
Right here. I don't know what the green is there. That seems like it's running down the center of Edgemere Court.
That's actually all the homes that are there. We don't need to do anything else with them. The homes, right, the homes are the walls.
Okay.
So the walls of your house constitute the necessary wall to enclose the community.
Even though there's space between it.
Even though there's a little bit of space, the little bit of space is inconsequential
Okay.
because the houses are doing what they need to do.
And what was this little?
There's one vacant lot.
Yeah.
Right, and what we need to do is we're going to talk to whoever has got it, to the extent that it doesn't have a fence, which I think is required by code.
There is a construction fence there now.
Okay, so as long as there's a construction fence there and it goes from sideline to sideline, then we're fine. But that's why it didn't have the line going in the same direction. It's a little bit of a notch in there because it's vacant.
Yeah.
But
Okay, well, thank you.
you're welcome, and thank you for your interest.
Well, but we also, I'll support that we have.
Why don't you come up to the, I'm sorry, if you want to speak, you'll have to come up and sign in and.
I'm sorry, I'm Mary Ann McGrath, and I just wanted to point out, in the previous picture, that's our house, and we have the 20-foot post next door to it. So there's actually a picture of our house where the maple tree is turning, and that's our house right there, and right next to it is the 20-foot post.
Right.
The proposed post.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the proposed 20-foot piece right there, that's like
So,
5 feet from our house.
like here somewhere, or?
Yeah.
It's in there somewhere. I know that they photoshopped it in. It's similar to all the other poles that are there. I think it's actually right here. You can barely see it. And obviously, we said we'll make it look just like the city of Evanston poles that are there. And there's a few other poles that are just outside your house too. Hopefully,
Okay, well, we can talk about it then.
of course.
Why does it have to be 20 feet high? Oh, because you have to tie a wire across the top? Nah, okay.
Right. 20 feet. The proposal for 20 feet was simply because the existing poles that are there are 20-foot high poles. We wouldn't want to put it much more closer to the ground than that because we want to have clearance. The clearance in the state of Illinois for vehicles is 13 and a half feet. If you have grading equipment that has to run through and work at the beach, we wouldn't want it to interfere with the accessibility to the beach for the grading equipment. 20 feet high is way above whatever we would need, so it doesn't bother anybody. Nobody has to worry about taking it down or putting it back up. It's just there.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other public comment? Yes, sir.
My name's Alan Riggs. I live at 1111 Hinman.
Excuse me, did you have a chance to sign up this sheet? There's a sheet to your right.
Where is it? I will.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And this is completely for different reasoning. My wife and I, we walk a lot. We walk the lake all the time. We consider the so-called snow fence as a true eyesore. And the worst part about it is all those wonderful benches have been built over the last few years. You can't see across the snow fence. Now, it's been taken down here and there when it's not on the beach, but it's still. But anyway, I decided to make a comment because since a possibility would be the wrought iron, which I assume would be aluminum probably in that location, but nevertheless, the look of our wrought iron, aesthetically, it would really improve Lee Beach. And people sitting on the benches could actually see the beach when they're sitting. So I don't know if that's worth the consideration, but as a person who's there almost every day and all up and down the beach, that would be at least a visual improvement, in my opinion.
Thanks. Any other comment from city staff or anybody? I mean, you'd have to make any. Okay, all righty. Any discussion?
I had a question. I guess I'll try it on the applicants. Yeah, okay, the sign. Why was this wrought iron fence proposed for Lee? It's not proposed anywhere else. As far as
I'm not sure. Go ahead. I know when we met with Dapper, well, actually, there was a historical conversation, because when we first put the proposal through, we had suggested replacing a lot of the snow fence with something more durable, like chain link, and that was shot down immediately. And then we talked about maybe some places doing some wrought iron. Why they focused on Lee, I'm going to let the rabbi tell you.
Okay, so the civil
You
engineer.
just state your name.
My name is Rabbi Dov Hillel Klein.
And you've signed in the sheet?
I know I could. Which one do you want me to sign? I was
Right there
hoping
in
not
front
to
of
have
you,
to
there's a
speak
sheet.
today. Which one?
The one that's in front of you.
Okay. Okay, when we were at the Dapper meeting, so when we came to the Lee Street Beach, because it was a smaller beach, so the civil engineer wasn't sure aesthetically if it was better to have the cable wire go across or if it was better to have a wrought iron fence there, and because of aesthetic purposes. And they didn't feel themselves to be experts in aesthetics. They felt that was your expertise, and therefore they deferred it to you. So that's the only location that they felt they weren't expert enough in order to decide whether or not it deserved to have a wrought iron fence or poles or the cable wire. So that was the reason. It was nothing more than what is the best aesthetically, and they were going to defer to historical.
So just to be clear, it's not your request.
It's not our request. I think for us, it seemed that the cable would work much better. That's why we proposed it initially. But it became a question at the Dapper meeting, as it is a smaller beach, whether or not we should go with the wrought iron fence.
If you look at the picture there, the lower picture, you'll see that the south end of Lee Street Beach is currently a wrought iron fence running all the way from Lakeshore Drive out to the beach and actually out across the breakwater.
It's the east-west fence.
The history of that, when we moved into the house 25 years ago, there was a chain link and barbed wire fence there. And we were in the process of discussing with the city and preservation replacing the chain link and barbed wire. I didn't particularly care for living behind a barbed wire fence, and I think the city didn't particularly like the idea of having a barbed wire fence there. And the city asked us at that time if we would consider putting in a wrought iron, because I said I wanted to put in the wrought iron fence, and then they asked us if we would consider paying for it and extending that fence all the way out on the breakwater, which we did. So aesthetically, as you look from Lee Street Beach, you're looking down towards downtown Chicago, you're looking at a wrought iron fence that extends the entire way out. Compliments of us. But we were happy to do it because aesthetically it's the right thing to do. So I think someone probably picked up on that and thought aesthetically you should finish that job at Lee Street Beach and make it aesthetically pleasing.
Is it the same pattern, the one that's being shown?
Well, you can see, actually in that picture you can
Wait,
see.
those- Carlos, it's in
Oh.
one of those drawings, isn't it? Yeah. Is that the same?
Oh, well, if you go to the other picture, okay. I mean,
I can't see the
This is on the test.
yeah.
It should be the same.
Here is the fence. It's not quite the same, but you could probably, the thing to do would be to follow the style.
Okay, if I could just ask city staff, it doesn't sound like we're being asked to actually approve a wrought iron fence today, that's just like a possibility.
I thought that's in there, that it's option A or option B. Isn't that part of the?
It is an yes, again, Kimberly Richardson, it is an option that we are looking for direction from you to provide us, as it was one, as stated, staff had requested to look into, but they really deferred it back to preservations to provide us with that feedback if we should move forward with the wrought iron or with the original proposal of a wire.
Okay, thank you.
If I may,
I just have a question. I did, okay. I just want I think I just want to be clear about something. So basically, if you just did the poles on Lee Street and then you connected the wires 20 feet up, then this whole fence, you don't have to do anything, right? Because you still have, is that correct?
Right.
And so the kind of the fence that's there, the snow fence, that would just be there as it is, but you don't need anything, really. You don't even need that snow fence there if you're connecting with the wires, right?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I get, it seems odd we're talking about the fence if it's not something the applicant wants. It seems like if the city wants to put a fence around the park, the city should put a fence around the park and not burden this project with it.
Well, and I think a lot of it has to do with just making sure the community, even though we're speaking of the lakefront, we still understand that that's impacting the neighbors in that area. And so we want to ensure whatever decision, there's some options that they can look at, and it's not steadfast that it has to be one or the other. It was more of just understanding the community, what would make more sense in that location. Would it be a pole or would it be a wrought iron fence? And so we're looking for that kind of direction. It's not something where, it was because of an issue. It was more just wanting to make sure wherever is being placed is what would make sense for that neighborhood.
Yeah, I think our job is to approve what the applicant's requesting. And obviously, if the city wishes to request more or require the applicant to request more, we can do it. But it's just not our job to say you must change an existing fence. I mean, the fence is there, and if the proposal were to come up, we could do it. But I just don't know we should decide on a. I mean, it's just not our job to require it. I don't think we would object to it, but I don't think it's our job to require it.
Well, that raises the other question which came up during the presentation about light poles versus bare poles, because the applicant didn't propose light poles. I noticed that as you went through if you keep going through the PowerPoint, we suddenly see all these factory cuts. They start showing up suddenly. It's like, why am I looking at shop drawings for light bulbs and light fixtures? If the city, and it goes back to what you were saying, Mark, if the city felt or still feels that they need supplemental lights, at the boat launching or anywhere else, then I would have asked, why, number one, were they never installed before? And why is that a part of this project? Because it doesn't strike me that this is a request from the applicants that you're saying we should be dealing with.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with this is that there's a lot of uncertainty as to what's going to happen because the city hasn't decided. But I think we're equipped simply to approve the minimal improvements that the applicants requested, which are some poles and a little bit of reinforcing and minor extension of the fence. And then
And I also want to
if
add
that
that
turns out
making light poles is much more obtrusive than
Well,
single.
we have to
wire.
decide that. I mean, it's just speculative. And if in fact a different
Can I speak to that?
project needs to be
Not
built.
speculative.
Well, let me speak to that. I think this will be more clarity to the discussion, is that it wasn't the light fixture itself that they were looking at, the staff was looking at. It was looking at the pole to mimic the style of what's existing with the light structure. So it's not looking at it from, we want to have another light fixture that's operational. It's, we want to make sure the style, so it won't be a pole that's just sticking up, that's just a black pole, and then we're going to have, it's going to then be very noticeable. We wanted to have that consistency, so it's looking at the structure of the pole itself, which is the light structure pole that's used in that area. So it wasn't to electrify the beach any further. It was looking for it to just have that consistency. As to that being a part of the application, it was added, it was given as part of wanting to make sure we had consistency of what the specs would look like. Probably it should have been taken out, but it wasn't. But again, we're not looking to electrify. It was looking more to the fact that we wanted a consistency. So it would not look out of place when you're walking. You're like, where's that black pole there for? Versus, you see a similar pole, you're not going to look up to see there's a light fixture attached.
Okay, thanks. Okay, and then why don't we have everybody sit down and just let the commission decide?
I I will note that I do not believe that any of the neighbors or people that live within 250 feet of these proposed improvements was giving notice of this meeting. So I suspect that there might be more people that would have an interest in saying something. From my perspective, as someone who is within 250 feet of the proposed possible 20-foot pole, we would have no objection to a wrought iron fence across the front of that Lee Street beach, consistent with the existing aesthetics of the area, and I think that is the preservation. We would have no objection to use of the snow fencing there that's historically been used as the wire. We would object to a 20-foot high pole with a wire across the top across Lee Street Beach. From a aesthetic preservation, I think it does offend the preservation standards and would be inconsistent with the preservation district. So, and I will note that I think many, many other neighbors would feel, would share that if they had notice of this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Was notice required, and do we think notice was given?
The ordinance requires notification for construction, demolition, and additions to structures like houses, buildings. These are poles, cables, and fences, which are approved regularly by staff.
Was notice given?
No, it's not required.
Okay.
It's not.
What's the diameter of the pole? This is important.
Some are square, aren't they?
4-inch diameter is what we installed.
Oh, excuse me, can you come to?
4-inch diameter?
4-inch diameter. The pole that's the existing light pole, I'm trying to remember if it was a 5-inch diameter. But it's
Okay.
it's very similar.
Okay.
Thank
you. Do we feel we know enough to make a decision? What does anybody have any feeling on that?
I'm still mulling that over, but I do have a recommendation or a suggestion about if, in fact, the city or whoever is deciding this decides to go ahead with the wrought iron fence at Lee Street Beach. I would like to at least see it be in a finish that's more consistent with the rest of the beaches, which is more of a sand or a washed wood color. And I would just like to, I can understand the visibility and how it might be easier to see through it. And I just, as a person who uses that beach a lot, I don't think just because there's a 6-foot or however high that fence is that goes from east to west at the south end of the beach that it necessarily has to be the same color.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I don't think we need to. I don't think the party's really contemplating today, at least, building a fence that we have to, new fence that we have to vote on.
Carlos, I didn't think we have any say over color. Do you?
No, when you have an addition, you can ask compatibility. In other words, the addition should be compatible with the house, but we don't have purview over color itself.
I think that since I was not aware of any roofs like anywhere in Evanston, that the wire 20 feet up above your head, I don't think anybody even sees it. So I think personally having like a 4-inch pole as opposed to like this whole fence that has to be designed and everything. I think they're, I don't think at the end of the day it sounds, I mean, neighbors might get upset, but I think it's going to be far more minimal than doing this whole fence and having, so I think the idea of it might not be really what the appearance would be. I don't think you will ever see this wire, between these poles that are really far apart, so.
I agree.
I very much agree with that, the poles and wires is by far the least intrusive to the historic setting of any of the options. And if there's some need for the park to have a fence around the beach, that's a city parks department problem and not something they need to consider as part of this application. It seems like, if I understand the whole application correctly, it seems like, at least for tonight, the only post that's in any remote proximity to anyone's house is this one added post at the south end of the Lee Street beach. Could you comment a little more about, like, where specifically is that post relative to his house, and does that location matter?
We had
What
proposed
flexibility is
that
there?
that pole at the south end of Lee Street Beach go adjacent to the property line, right at the edge of the city's property. I had an opportunity just now to speak with Mr. McGrath for a minute. Our goal is not to create divisiveness or dissension. Our goal is to create community, to bring more people together. And if need be, there's at that location, it's hard to see here, but there's like a driveway with a gate that goes into the beach at that area that's used for equipment. There's a small section of snow fence that goes from the McGrath property line towards that gate. And if it would create a better feel for neighborliness, we would propose to install an additional piece of wrought iron in that location until the point of the gate. And at the south end of that wrought iron, the north end of that wrought iron addition, put the 20-foot high pole so that it's not right up against the McGrath property line.
Is that an extension of the existing?
Well, the existing wrought iron, I think that there's some masonry at the bottom of it.
Yeah, you can actually see the gate, though, that we're talking about
Right there.
That's,
Right.
no,
We would put our pole at the south end of that gate and fill in the gap with wrought iron, because we're sensitive. We're here to create community, to have good feelings. And that's a small piece of wrought iron that hopefully would not be objectionable. Obviously, it would be black, and it would be made to blend in. It's not going to match exactly because you're talking about different elevations and whatever, but something that aesthetically blends in. That would be our goal.
You're going to relocate the pole you're proposing roughly towards where
We'll move it just a little bit to the north so that it comes near the south end of the gate that provides access for service vehicles onto the beach.
what happens to the wire above?
The wire above will just terminate at that pole and then continue going north to the other existing poles that are there. So that the gate that's there would have the cable above it. That would be the doorway. And to the south of that pole would be a fence connecting with the other fence, which are walls.
right, and that's, you can see the gate here. So this is the gate, this is the south pole, and that's maybe 20 feet away from our dining room window. Right here would be right through our dining room window. So
But
Can you show them where it would be the new post?
right at that south post.
this post.
Right there.
Exactly. So again, I had a chance to talk with Mr. Graff for a minute. We don't want to create an eyesore for the neighbors. And I think that if we can put something over here, it's not going to match, because here there's masonry underneath, but something that'll blend in. We can fill that in with wrought iron. We'll move that pole another 20 feet away from his property line. You could.
No, that would,
And we want to do it because we want to have friends here. We're not looking to create dissension.
Okay, thanks. All right. If there are no more questions, would anybody like to make a motion to approve? Somebody? Diane, do you want to? You're looking.
If I can remember, I move that we issue a certificate, or are we doing that, or are we providing a recommendation to the city council?
It's actually,
Well, if they're asking for a permit and it's not a city project, your
Is a certificate of
Yes.
appropriateness. Okay. I move that we issue a certificate of appropriateness for the Aruve District expansion in the Lakeshore Historic District section, which includes reinforcing along the Lakefoot forefront high snow fences. At the Clark Street Beach, the installation of one 20-foot black pole, the same as the pole that exists there, then install aerial wire along the existing poles at the Arrington Lakefront Lagoon, the installation of one 30-foot high square tube to match the existing light pole and extend the aerial wire across. At Greenwood Street Beach, install one 20-foot black pole to match the existing one and install aerial wire pole along the existing poles. Extend the existing 4-foot high chain link fence up to the light pole at the Lee Street Beach. To go with the option that was proposed here tonight, which would be the installation of a pole, a 20-foot black pole at the south end of the entrance to Lee Street Beach. Is that at the equipment drive at the entrance to Lee Street Beach? And with the requisite fencing to go along with that? And that applicable standards for alteration 1 through 10 apply. And did I miss anything?
I think it's close enough.
I think at Lee Street, there's also one additional pole at the northern
Oh, at the
end there.
northern end. Okay, if I could amend that and add the additional pole at Lee Street Beach.
Second. Second. Sally. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain?
No opposed?
Nope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so next, Carlos had distributed the meeting minutes. Was there any?
The only two comments I received was to update the who was presiding the meeting, which was Ken, not Mark, and then to complete the date from November 2018 to November 13, 2018 on page 4, I believe, second paragraph under item 4. It was very minimal edits.
Okay, thanks. Do we have a motion to approve the December 11th minutes?
Approve the revised minutes of the December 11th, 2018.
Second?
Second.
Ken, seconds. All in favor? Yes. Okay.
How many abstentions?
I'm abstaining. I wasn't in it.
1, 2, 3.
4 abstentions.
4. So it's 4 passes, right?
Yeah.
4 to 4.
Even though I
What's abstention? 4-0.
4-0, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So that would be Sally, Diane, and
Julie and Elliot
yeah,
were abstaining.
okay.
Elliot got elected in abstention,
I
right?
know. Can I object? I approved the minutes. Just being enough, I offered to revise them, even though I wasn't there.
Interesting.
Carlos Stewart.
Carlos didn't object to that.
No, I'm fine. Thanks. That's it, right? Any? You have any questions for me? Okay, so staff report.
Can I just ask a question about meeting? Carl, is there a way I'm determined to get these guidelines up online this year?
Yes. Yes.
We meet?
Yes, and I
You're gonna-
saw your email, and
Okay.
I can reply with that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we have the grant agreement signed finally from the Department of Natural Resources for the camp workshop. So the goal is to have the workshop in the spring of 2019. I already been in contact with the camp office, send them an email to request dates that they can suggest we can have the workshop. We would prefer to have it on a Friday. We know that there will be no more, we can have no more than 30 people attending. That will include commission members and city staff. Any available seating will be through other registrations. Highland Park has asked for information about it, and also got contact from Landmarks Illinois that they would also like to inform their members, the North Shore Alliance, so that they can register. So once I receive the information from camp as far as the dates, then I will transmit that to you, and hopefully we have a majority of the commissioners, if not all, attending the workshop, so we can determine the date on that.
So it would be all day on a Friday?
It's from 9 a.m. to about 2 or 3 p.m.
Okay. Is a Friday something most people could do, or?
We're thinking about April and maybe early May at the latest, before summer.
I mean, hopefully they could give us a few choices.
Right, so I asked them for at least 3 dates to give us some information on that. They need to make sure that they have enough staff to be able to come to Evanston.
What was the email that Carlos had circulated on, that Diane had sent about Landmarks, Illinois?
Is that the one from earlier today that I
Yes,
sent you,
yes.
Carlos? Yeah, essentially, Lisa DeCara is getting together the Chicago Suburban Preservation Alliance meetings for this coming year. You may remember that I went to a lot of them. Carlos went to some, other folks went to some as well. But I think it would be something going forward that it would be good that when they do meet, and it's 2 or 3 times a year, if somebody from the commission went, because often a lot of the issues that they discuss are things that are facing other commissions that I think can help inform our decisions going forward. And I think I went to a lot of them and found them very useful. And I guess it was just a recommendation that if you can just keep it going once you know the dates. Usually when they've identified them, you usually have quite a bit of notice, so you can put it on your calendar and figure out who's going. So
I have an email from Jamie, I believe, that she has already expressed interest in attending.
Oh, yeah, that would be terrific, because I won't be around after May to go there.
Yeah, I have attended those meetings as well, and it's good
yeah.
networking, and also to understand what the challenges other commissions or
Yeah.
cities have.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get some ideas from, solutions that they conceive, and then you also make Evanston, relevant for the other communities. They want to know, how are we operating. Recently, I got an email from commissioner from Winnetka, who wanted to know how many landmarks we have, how many honorary landmarks we have, which we don't, but and she was impressed with the number of landmarks we have, the fact that we have local districts, and she was very thankful that the city of Evanston takes preservation seriously. So that type of networking.
Was the intent that we are one of the hosts? The way I read that thing, it was almost as if they're asking.
No, they usually look for different folks to host every year, so it typically moves around. We did host it. When was it? 3 or 4 years ago,
Yeah, we did.
something like that. Maybe it was less than that, but You know, it's been in a number of different communities. It's Lombard, Downers Grove, it's Joliet. It's typically all over, but it's limited to the suburbs. Park Ridge, I think, was another one that hosted it. So it moves around all the time, but they usually want one community to host it, and then some of their issues are typically highlighted as part of the program. So. And it usually is a Saturday morning. That's typically when the meetings are.
Yeah, it usually runs from maybe 9 till about
Right.
1.
Right.
You know, they
Right.
provide sometimes lunch, sometimes
Yeah.
people go out on their
And,
own.
Yeah, a lot of times at the end they'll have some optional local tours, so you can actually cut out if you need to. I hope Lisa DiChiara isn't watching.
So you have the email from myself that, forwarded email from Lisa, and thank you, Diane, for bringing it up, because I saw the email, but I didn't read it, so I'm glad that you highlighted. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other business? Would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
I second.
Julie, all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.